He's a founding father, the author of the Declaration of Independence, and the man who lived at Monticello, a place where the large slave quarters highlight one of the many contradictions of the man who wrote, "All men are created equal." Pulitzer Prize winning author Jon Meacham writes in his latest book, Thomas Jefferson, The Art of Power, that our third president was the greatest, most influential leader of early America.
This was a human being with vices and virtues and sins and shortcomings and good days and bad days and marvelous things to emulate and horrible things to avoid.
Meacham spent 4 years researching this book, getting as close as one can to walking in the shoes of someone who died more than 2 centuries ago.
I stayed the night in Jefferson's bedrooms, and I wanted to do that because I wanted to hear the sounds of the house, but I mainly wanted to see at what point the sun reached his alcove bed, because he said that he always woke with the sun. Well, damned if he didn't build the house so that his rooms would be the first place the sun struck. And so he was right.
Meacham writes Jefferson loved philosophy, architecture, science, history, women, power, and most of all his country, making him an intriguing figure to discuss in this one-on-one with Jon Meacham. 40 years, half of his life, he was in office or thinking about it. He served as governor of Virginia, U.S. Minister to France, Secretary of State, Vice President, and the third President of the United States during one of the most tumultuous times in our nation's history.
Can pragmatism be principled? Can an idealist be in politics and not lose his soul? These are important questions. They're perennial questions, but all of them coalesce in the particular life of Thomas Jefferson.
There was constant debate over how this new nation should be run, what the role of the president even was, and the best way to keep Great Britain from regaining control. Jefferson was one of those presidents who possessed the perfect combination of skills to lead our country through it all.
He cultivated his elders, he learned the lessons, he mastered the process, he mastered the means of communication by learning how to write quickly and well. That was the moral equivalent of Franklin Roosevelt mastering the radio, or John Kennedy and Ronald Reagan mastering television, or Barack Obama mastering the internet. Great political leaders master the means of communication of their time. And Jefferson did that. He was one of the very few who could imagine an ideal and had the skills to bring that ideal closer to reality. And when you think about it, those are two very different skill sets. You know, philosophers, academics, preachers can project visions. Deals can be cut by businessmen, by legislative tacticians, fixers. There aren't many fixers with grand vision, and there aren't many grand visionaries who are very good fixers. The great politicians are both. Franklin Roosevelt was both. Ronald Reagan was both. John Kennedy was both. And Thomas Jefferson was both.
The negotiating skills that he used, and some even kind of going against some of his principles that maybe had other politicians done, he wouldn't have been real fond of.
I'm going to use a technical historical term. His head would have exploded.
For example, the Louisiana Purchase. The best real estate deal in our nation's history may not have happened without Jefferson bending his own rules. He was a strict constructionist. He believed in the Constitution and its constraints on the federal government. When he learned of Napoleon's desire to sell off the Louisiana Territory to fund ongoing wars with London, Jefferson took action.
Jefferson immediately begins preparing a constitutional amendment to pass the Congress and the state legislatures, because it's not an enumerated power to add territory to the Union. About the 21st, 22nd of August, 1803, he gets a letter saying Napoleon is rethinking his renunciation of Louisiana. And suddenly, in what I think of as his Claude Rains moment,
I'm shocked to find that gambling is going on in here. Jefferson
is shocked that anyone would suggest we needed a constitutional amendment to do this, and he just does it. And he writes in a letter on the 23rd of August, 6 weeks after the first notification, that we should not let constitutional niceties stand in the way of the progress of the country.
If Alexander Hamilton had said that.
Boom.
Yeah.
Or John Adams. Jefferson exerted the power of the presidency in a way that no president had done before, and which set an interesting pattern, which his successors loved. Franklin Roosevelt explicitly pointed to the Louisiana Purchase as an antecedent when he was sending destroyers to Britain in the run-up to World War II because he couldn't get popular and congressional support for what he wanted to do. Jefferson, he was a small government man sometimes, he was a big government man sometimes, and as I sat down and tried to figure all this out, my argument became that fundamentally he was driven by political concerns and defining politics as solving the immediate issues that confront the Republic in as popular a way as possible to get you 51% to fix it for a little while, short of compromising the existence of the country.
As you can imagine, many questioned this leadership style.
You, sir, you are a walking contradiction.
John Adams and Thomas Jefferson's disagreements are well documented in the HBO miniseries John Adams. Despite their debates and many more with other congressional critics, Jefferson managed to routinely get his legislative agenda passed. How? It all started with his invitations to the White House dining room, one politicians rarely turned down.
So he brought him in. He would not mix the two parties. It was all Republicans one night, all Federalists the next. And there's a wonderful story about a senator from New Hampshire who, in 1803, comes to the Congress, absolutely convinced that Thomas Jefferson is evil incarnate. Sits down and starts going to dinner at the White House. By the end of Jefferson's term, 6 years later, they're exchanging pecan seeds and basically recipes. I mean, they came to respect one another.
Along with the countless legislative and leadership victories, there was one major area where Jefferson failed: slavery.
Thomas Jefferson was not the only thing standing between slavery and abolition, but he was there can only be one greatest politician of that era. And if I'm right, that he was the greatest politician of that era, then we cannot let him off the hook for not attempting what he thought to be impossible. Because everything seems impossible until you do it.
Early in his law career, he may have thought it was possible. He tried a handful of times to take steps to abolish slavery, but each time those measures failed miserably. So he did something completely out of character. He gave up.
He was unwilling to risk his popularity to do it. His base was in the South. He was brought to power by the 3/5 compromise. His own life was made possible by slavery, from the beginning of his life to the end. And so it's an enormous tragedy. It's the central tragedy of his life. It is also the central tragedy of American history. And we put a lot on Jefferson, you know? A 19th century biographer, James Parton, wrote that if America is right, then Jefferson is right. If Jefferson was wrong, then America is wrong. We don't say that about Hamilton. I mean, you know, and so if you're in doing what we do, you have to sort of sit back and go, well, why is that? Why do we think? And I think that's because he articulated the best we could be, and he did and participated in the worst we were.
The man who wrote All Men Are Created Equal owned 600 slaves over his lifetime, and several of them shared his own DNA. Recent evidence suggests he had children with slave Sally Hemings. No photographs of her exist. This is what an artist thinks she may have looked like. Their 40-year sexual relationship began after Jefferson's wife Martha died. Sally was Martha's half-sister, which just shows you how common these secret relationships were in the South.
It's disturbing. It's discombobulating. It's not something that we can really, I think if we're being totally honest, put ourselves in that position. We can imagine his political life. We can imagine his economic life. The emotional currents of power and desire and denial that were flowing through those houses, it boggles the mind.
In many ways, this home serves as a reflection of the man who was Thomas Jefferson. He called Monticello his essay in architecture, designing it with ideals from around the world. He filled his home with the things that most intrigued him: inventions, thousands of books, which ultimately served as a nucleus for the present-day Library of Congress, and a vast collection from the natural world.
Many artifacts from Lewis and Clark. The front hall is almost a homage to the American West and the opening of the West, which obsessed him. The house faces west.
Those visions and ideas populated his mind, not financial concerns. When he died on July 4th, 1826, in today's terms, he was $1 to $2 million in debt.
How does someone who is so intelligent and is so informed on
And controlling
get this far into debt? How does that happen?
His personal financial naivete was striking. It was a little like Macabre in Dickens. You know, he always thought something would turn up. You know, this crop would work out. This, you know, he started a nail factory at Monticello. That was going to do it. It's a curiosity. It's one of the contradictions. That a man who noted everything about his life and his day, including the temperatures and all that, would allow himself to become as concretely out of control as one could be.
To err is human, as Alexander Pope famously said, and perhaps it's those flaws, as great as they may be, that help to bring down this larger-than-life founding father to our level, making him much more relatable.
One can imagine having dinner with Thomas Jefferson. I can't imagine having dinner with Adams or Washington.